Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in sum, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now, said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Antarctic and Greenland would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Tonight, Donald Trump is going to give the State of the Union address. Are you going to be boycotting it or watching? I'm certainly looking forward to Stacey Abrams' rebuttal. I mean, I have to watch Trump's thing because it's what I do for a living, but I'm not sure you have to. But, the question, what is the state of our union? And, what do you think is the state of our union? I'm going to get into, a number of other people's opinions here in just a moment, but I think the state of our union is worried. We are worried about global warming. We're worried about all the lobbyists running government. We just learned today, or actually yesterday, I guess. I've got the article to go off on today. We just learned that another guy, this scientist who worked for Koch Industries. Koch Industries owns Georgia Pacific, the big paper company. Georgia Pacific apparently has a problem with contaminating land with a particular class of chemicals. And this guy is now working at the EPA trying to make sure that those chemicals are not regulated or not regulated the way, it's like, this is so weird. So anyhow, we're worried about global warming. Trump is doing not only nothing about that, he's making the situation worse. He pulled us out of Paris. The lobbyists running the government. We're worried that the economy is going to crash. We just added $1.5 trillion to our national debt last year. We're going to add another $1 trillion to it this year. It's getting, it's getting to the point where, back in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was worrying out loud about the national debt, and it was at $800 billion, less than $1 trillion. Of course, he tripled it, but back then, the Republicans were like, oh my God, if the national debt gets too big, it's going to be a real problem because of all the interest payments. Well, we're there. We're concerned about that. We're worried that Trump is going to start a war or insert us into a war. Sudan is melting down. Yemen is in a famine right now as a result of this brutal war against them by Saudi Arabia, which we are aiding and abetting and providing weapons for. We are worried about the children who've been ripped from their mother's arms at the border, and we're worried that now the Trump administration is saying that thousands of these children will never be reunited with their families because that would be too traumatic. And it's too much effort for the Trump administration to do this. You know, it would take 100 people working on this project. And, you know, we just can't hire 100 people to reunite these children. So to hell with them, you know. So we're worried about the children who've been ripped from their mother's arms at the border. We're worried that Trump has sold this country out to tin pot dictators around the world, that he's sucking up to Duterte and Putin and Erdogan. And, I mean, you know, pick your authoritarian leader. Trump loves them all. We're worried that Mike Pence is going to destroy the rights of women, and we're going to be flashing back. I don't know if you saw the ad during the Super Bowl for Netflix's, movie. It's The Handmaid's Tale. It's just extraordinary what Mike Pence. I mean, you know, is he going to pass a law saying that, you know, men can't eat alone with women? That's the law that he lives by. That in business, men shouldn't travel with women if they're not married. I mean, you know, what's coming with a Pence presidency? We're also worried because many of us are one paycheck away from living on the street. The next medical crisis might be unaffordable. Even if you have insurance, the average deductible in insurance policies in the United States on employer-based insurance policies, which is what most people have, is around $4,000. Most people can't sustain a $500, you know, half Americans can't sustain a $500 expense. But most of all, we're worried about what Trump might do that we can't yet imagine. I mean, you know, when you govern by whim, you get a worried electorate. So, you know, what's on your mind? By the way, stuff coming up today in the second hour of our program, maybe in the first hour of our program, we'll see Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, is going to drop by. Ocean Robbins is going to be here talking about our food and our pet food. Andrew Boyle, what if Trump declares a national emergency? Andrew has some really extraordinary credentials to be talking about this. He's the counsel for the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center. And prior to that, he spent 7 years prosecuting senior Khmer Rouge leaders on behalf of the UN for war crimes. So that's going to be a fascinating one. So what are your expectations for tonight, and what are your fears or concerns or worries for our nation? I got an email from Eric Trump about 20 minutes ago. Dear Fred Flintstone, we are sick of hearing the media say that we don't have a voice. Today that ends. You can prove the media wrong while the world watches my father's critical, all caps, critical State of the Union address. The official Donald J. Trump for President live stream of the speech will display the names of all the patriots who choose to make a contribution for the world to see. Please make a contribution of $42 in the next 3 hours to have your name proudly displayed live during the President's State of the Union address. Official State of the Union donor list. President Trump hopes to see your name. Contribute here. Yeah, they are. These grifters are hustling money on the State of the Union. Can you imagine if Obama had done that? I mean, virtually everything they're up to, I'm saying, can you imagine if Obama had done that? It's absolutely bizarre. Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos, he just does some of the most brilliant writing. And he says, what's Trump going to say? Expect a lot of bragging. Expect a lot of lies. Don't expect to hear about the billions in damage done by the shutdown. And, what are we expecting? Whether Trump's speech will be as exciting as I'm declaring a national emergency and stealing billions for my giant monument to xenophobia, or exciting as the missiles are flying right now, isn't all that clear. He's going to have in the gallery, he's going to have some guests who are victims of crimes committed by people who are in this country without documentation. Mayweather, Trump supporters are starting to do their taxes. Oh, my God. Oh, this is incredible. Sarah _SKG _1983 has tweeted this out in reply to Donald Trump. She says she's got this graphic. Trump supporters just got their tax rebates from the IRS, and their responses, LOL. We tried to tell all you morons, but no, he was your savior, and he wouldn't do that to you. But this is only the beginning. And here's some of the tweets. I just did my taxes and paid in and made the same as last year, I owe $4,000 more. WTF, I voted for Trump, but will not be in the next election. Here's another one. This is from A9N7G3. Worst tax return I had in a decade. I admit I voted for Trump, but he has officially lost my vote for 2020. Here's another one tweeting to Senator Schumer. Senator Schumer, well, you were right about taxes going up. I'm a Republican, and I was wrong big time. It doesn't change. I am not voting for him. All my buddies are really mad they voted for him now. Here's another one from April Henderson. We're paying $5,000 more in taxes for 2018. Imagine our surprise. We voted for you. We've advocated for you. I've lost lifelong friends in support of you. I am truly disappointed. Not only have our taxes increased, but you've done nothing to fix our health care. This is from Matt Davis. Donald Trump, I trusted and voted for you. Now screwed by you. I don't get the $5,000 return I've gotten in the last 3 years. Money my family depends on to start us over. I served my country honorably. I will not make the same mistake twice. And it goes on from there. I mean, there's several more. Ed Krasenstein is tweeting. He says, Hillary Clinton loses emails. And this is interesting to see if there's going to be anything about this tonight in the State of the Union or in Stacey Abrams' rebuttal. Hillary Clinton loses emails and Republicans chant, lock her up. Donald Trump loses children, thousands of them, and Republicans chant 4 more years. If you still don't think this is some sort of sick, twisted cult, maybe it's time to reevaluate your priorities as Americans. Yeah. Here's a question for you. This was the Daily Kos, poll today. How many lies, distortions, and moments of outright propaganda will Trump include in his State of the Union address tonight? 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, or more than 50? The most votes on Daily Kos went to more than 50. 1,800 people said more than 50. Second most was 30 to 40 lies that Trump will tell tonight. Third most was 20 to 30 lies. That was 237 votes. The next up was 40 to 50. That was 157 votes. Only 12 votes for 0 to 10. How many lies do you think Donald Trump is going to tell tonight? Meanwhile, Trump said he was going to fix drug prices. Bernie Sanders is asking, in fact, he's formally asking this company, Lambert Eaton, that's not the name of the company. It's Catalyst is the name of the company. The disease is Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome. It's a rare neuromuscular disorder. The drug Firdapse was offered for treating this for years and years for free. And then these hustlers, Catalyst, this Florida-based company, bought the rights to it and raised the price to $375,000. If you have this rare disorder, this drug keeps you alive. They raised the price to $375,000 from free. So what's your State of the Union? I'm rather concerned, shall we say? Not quite fearful, but big time concerned about all these things, this whole list that I just went through with you. We'll see. We'll see where it goes, but we'll pick up your calls and find out what you are concerned about. What do you think should be the major focus of Stacey Abrams' speech? What should the Democrats be zeroing in on right now?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It's 17 and change past the hour. And welcome back. Tim in Beaverton, Oregon. Hey, Tim, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic what's going on, despite the fact that we should have learned our lesson with Sarah Palin back in 2008. The historians really should do, Beschloss and Doris Kearns should do a book on what would have happened if that woman would have been a heartbeat away from the presidency. Not enough people are focusing in on that. Scary stuff. And then we doubled down by putting that lunatic into office. But tonight's basically his speech is going to be a campaign speech. He's going to talk to the homophobic, racist, misogynistic Second Amendment nut jobs. That's the only ones he can appeal to now anyway. And if the Democrats had any courage, what they would do is boycott the speech tonight. I think that.
Well,
would
my
change.
Congressman Earl Blumenauer is not going, and he's one of at least four that I know of.
I think that would dramatically change what, the emphasis on what's going on. And you've been talking about statistics all week. I was in sales and marketing for 35 years, and I was actually in the car business for 20. And these articles were in the Oregonian, and real small articles over the last year or so. 6.8 million Americans are 90 days late in their car payments. So they're going to work in a car they haven't made a payment on in 3 months.
Really?
33% of Americans are massively late in their bills or have collection agencies going after them.
A third?
It's approaching 50% in some of the southern states, which is exactly who voted for them.
Where are you getting those statistics, Tim?
Those were in the Oregonian.
Really?
It's scary stuff. Yeah,
if you can find that article and tweet it to me, I would surely appreciate it.
It's amazing stuff, Like I said, I was in the car business for 20 years, so I understand how the system works. There's two key elements to this society: housing and transportation, which were both turned around by the Obama administration. A lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah.
You just have to put things in historical
So,
context.
you said what percentage of people are more than 90 days late right now on their car payments?
6.8 million people.
6.8 million people. How does that compare with numbers from 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Do you know?
Oh, actually, it was during the I was, like I said, I was in the car business. The Clinton administration was the most healthy. That's when a lot of new products were introduced to the market too.
Right.
And that's when the things were really rolling at that period. And then, of course, when Bush got in there, after the the illegal atrocities in Florida that put him in there. But that's a whole other story. And then obviously, because of the false boom in the economy in the 06, 07, before it went down the toilet, basically.
Right.
But,
a lot of people bought cars they couldn't
guys
afford.
were making, substantial money in the car business.
No, I get that. But you said there's 6.9 million people right now who are more than 90 days late in their car payments.
And you know what?
Can you put that in context? I don't know if that's bad or good.
What to do is that, you see, what people are when you get bought for a car, and specifically, like I said, I was in the business for many years. What they do is they want to get you bought. They want to get you over the curb and down the road. They don't really care what happens after that, because
Right.
what's happening now, and some dealerships were doing it some years ago, they hire collection agencies. So what they can actually do is get the car back and resell it as a used vehicle.
Right.
That's their.
So the plan is to both repo the car and claim the debt.
Exactly, and what they can do is they can resell that car and make some money. They have certified programs where they can put it back on the market.
So they get paid twice.
They're not going to lose anything, because the bank that bought the car is the one that's actually going to lose it.
Yeah, I got it. Boy, is that strange what's happening to your phone right now, Tim. Tim, if you could find that Oregonian article and tweet it to me, I will be very, very grateful. Thank you very much for the call, Tim. That's fascinating information. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes, coming up on 22 past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Rudy in Chicago, your thoughts on the State of the Union?
Yes, good morning.
Hey, Rudy.
I wanted to get your opinion, because I heard that people are going to boycott the State of the Union so that Trump has the slowest audience ever, although he'll probably claim that it was the biggest ever.
Yeah.
And then also, we know what he's going to say. He's going to blame Democrats for wanting to have crime and drugs and rapists here, and he's just going to have a bunch of lies. So why even listen to that?
Oh, the lies are
your
just,
opinion?
they're making me crazy. This morning, Hallie Jackson on MSNBC had this Republican woman on, and she asked her something, and the woman said, well, the Democrats, all they want is open borders. So, and Hallie Jackson didn't even rebut it. Just naked lies. There's literally not one single Democrat who wants open borders. That's the libertarian position. Talk to Ron Paul about that, and Rand Paul. The libertarian position is that we shouldn't have borders, that labor should be free to move wherever it wants. But somehow these Republicans are out lying about Democrats. So you're saying just don't listen. Boycott the damn thing.
Is that a good idea or not? What do you think?
Yeah, on the one hand,
not to listen.
Yeah, on the one hand, one person not listening probably won't make a big difference. On the other hand, if thousands of people don't listen, it's going to be interesting to see what the statistics are like. But on the third hand, he might be making history tonight. He might do something insanely stupid. He might declare a state of emergency. God only knows. anyhow, Rudy, thank you for weighing in here. Jesse in Miami. Jesse, your thoughts?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Yeah, I think our State of the Union is a lie, and proof to it that we got the greatest wealth and inequality in history, and we're not dealing with it. Why? Because all we hear is redistribution of wealth, whereas it should be redistribution of representation. As long as we think we could tax the rich and that's a redistribution, that's not going to solve the problem. So basically, we got our problem because we believe a lie.
Yeah.
If we're going to solve our problems, we're going to have to say, forget the wealth redistribution, because, you know, you got the thief telling us the victims, how to, you know, correct what they're stealing and saying tax stolen wealth. How can you tax stolen wealth? No way, but that's the way we think.
So what you're saying, Jesse, is that if we want to have economic justice, first we've got to seize political power.
Well, we got to seize our mind. And if you want to call that politics, saying redistribution of representation the way it was done when this country was born,
redistribution of representation. I'm with you. Good one. Jesse, thank you. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what was just said. And, you know, democracy is the most revolutionary force, I think, more than any economic theory or anything else. But I wanted to talk about economics. And, you know, he is never going to change the biggest problem and the biggest lie, and that is neoliberal economics. It just doesn't work. We need, you know, a revitalization of the economy, which is exactly what Jesse was talking about. Essentially, we are going to have to redistribute this wealth that has been extracted and stolen from the rest of us. And their program is to steal more. They are not going to create new businesses, new wealth. They're not entrepreneurial. They're not creative. All they want to do is the same thing that they've been doing over and over and over again, and it is going to, you know, affect everything else. It's going to destroy, literally, the earth. You know, the Green New Deal is an excellent vehicle for, you know, changing that equation, infrastructure, supporting people in healthcare, education, reducing the military-industrial complex. I mean, you can go on and on. I mean, I know you've talked. Yeah,
it sounds like you're calling for neo-Keynesianism.
Yeah, Keynes. You know, he slipped my mind, but a Keynesian economic type of policy, you know, would be great. I mean, that's what we need. We need balance. We don't need an up and down kind of economy that makes a few people a lot of money and essentially, you know, brings the rest of us down to peonage or you know, we're all going to become peasants.
Yeah, and that's certainly what, you know, Reaganism, neoliberalism have brought us. You're absolutely right, John. It is the biggest lie out there. John, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What do you think is the State of the Union? I think it's very, very concerned about basically the rape of the earth by the billionaire class and their buddies. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And what is the State of the Union? What should we think about the State of the Union? And, of course, tonight Donald Trump is going to be talking about the State of the Union. You've had my thoughts on it. Yeah, a few of you have weighed in. We'll have more of your calls in a few minutes. But right now, Tom Perez is with us, the chair of the DNC, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Democrats.org is the DNC's website. You can tweet him at Tom Perez, P-E-R-E-Z, or at DNC. Chairman Perez, welcome back to the program.
Great to be back with you and your listeners, Tom.
Thank you. I in the beginning of this hour, kind of went through a rant of all the things that I think are basically wrong with Donald Trump and, the state of our union right now. I won't ask you to recite those. I'm curious, though, if the Democrats were actually in charge, if the Democrats had the Senate, and if we had a Democratic president in the White House, what in your opinion, or from your actual knowledge as head of the DNC, what would a Democratic president be saying tonight and proposing?
We would be talking, Tom, about shared prosperity. We would be talking about building an America that works for everybody, not just a few at the top. So specifically, we would be talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, making sure we protect health care coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, making sure that we address the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act, we're 90% of the way to health care for all, and we got to get that last 10% of the way. So we would be talking about the road to 100% coverage. We'd be talking about democracy reform. I'm so proud of Speaker Pelosi and the fact that the first bill that was introduced this year is H.R. 1, is all about democracy reform. Make it easier for eligible people to vote. Restore the Voting Rights Act. My worst day in the Obama administration was when the Supreme Court in 2013 struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We've got to address gerrymandering, racial and partisan. We've got to address Citizens United. Democracy reform does that. We'd be talking about infrastructure because infrastructure, meaningful infrastructure bills are a remarkably important way to address climate change. They're a remarkably important way to address the need to create good middle-class union jobs. And finally, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, we'd be fixing the horrific tax bill that was passed, which was a reckless giveaway to large corporations and the uber wealthy because we mortgaged our children's future and our nation's future.
That's pretty remarkable. It occurs to me that the Republicans for generations have been screaming about, we're the ones who want to save money, right? We're the ones who are in favor of fiscal responsibility. And yet we know from the experiment of the GI Bill that my wife's father, both went to college on the GI Bill. Louise's dad ended up the assistant AG of the state of Michigan as a consequence of his law degree that he got for free. My dad had 2 years in college and then dropped out because mom got pregnant with me. But anyhow,
all your fault, Tom.
Yeah, it really was. But in any case, what we learned from that was, after the experiment was done, and we looked back in the 1980s and 1990s and looked back at the earning power of those college graduates who had gone to college for free in the 1950s, the late 40s and through the 50s and early 60s, was that for every dollar we spent on the GI Bill for education, we made back $7 in increased taxes because people had higher earnings because of their education, not to mention, reviving America and the NASA and everything else. So free college education seems like, with a 7-to-1 return on investment, seems like an absolute no-brainer if you want to be fiscally conservative and save money. Same thing with Medicare for all. Medicare operates at 1 or 2%. I think it's 1.3 or 2.1%. I forget the number now. One is Social Security, the other is Medicare overhead, whereas the private for-profit health insurance companies, prior to the Affordable Care Act, were operating at 30, 35, 40, 50% overhead. And now, they've been limited by law to 20 and 25% overhead. But why the hell are we paying 25% extra to the health insurance companies when Medicare can do it for 1%? That's fiscally conservative. Why doesn't the average American understand this?
Well, we have to do more to educate people that we have their back, and we have their back on the issues that matter most. You mentioned two things there that I want to underscore, which was education and health. When I was labor secretary, we made unprecedented investments in apprenticeship. And it wasn't simply apprenticeship in the skilled trades. We were helping to build apprenticeship in computer coding, in so many other areas where you have in-demand jobs. And what I learned, Tom, is that apprenticeship was the other college, except without the debt. And there was one study that was commissioned that showed that every federal dollar that we invested in apprenticeship had a $28 return.
Wow.
So again, let's follow the fiscal conservatism that you are referring to. That is a damn good return on investment when you invest in education. I was a Pell Grant kid, so I understand this stuff, and I had debt for a long time. We at the DNC, one of the first things we did when I got here, by the way, was we paid our interns. You can't take a job if you're low income and you want to work in politics, but you can't get paid. And not surprisingly, when we started paying our interns, our diversity skyrocketed because we were expanding opportunity. On the healthcare front, and people may or may not be aware of this. In 2009, I believe it was, when Barack Obama first came in, we were so close in the Senate, and then the House would have followed suit, to passing a bill that would have lowered Medicare eligibility to 55 years old. And Joe Lieberman, the senator from Connecticut, flipped and no longer supported it. Think about where we would be today. He blew it up, and one vote, one senator blew it up.
Joe Lieberman, wasn't he also the vote that blew up the public option for Obamacare?
He was not helpful on that as well, and to say the least. You think about that. If we had lowered the Medicare age to 55, if we took steps today like allowing the government to use its massive purchasing power to lower the cost of prescription drugs, that would be a remarkable cost saver. We don't even need to pass a law right now to allow the federal government, through the Department of Health and Human Services, to authorize the purchase of medications from Canada. I hear this blather from the industry that, that would be dangerous. And my response to that is, show me the dead Canadians.
Right.
I don't see any of them. Right. When I was in local government, Tom, we passed a provision to allow our public sector employees, our school teachers, et cetera, to purchase their maintenance meds from Canada. Why did I do that? Because we couldn't reduce class size. Why couldn't we reduce class size? Because the cost of our medications, providing health care for our workers, was skyrocketing. And it was ridiculous. And meanwhile, we got buses going across the border from Vermont to Canada. Now we got, mail order from Canada. And I said, Perez, we did a hearing with the FDA, and I asked them, please show me the dead Canadians. I want to see them. So there's so much we can do if we simply have a North Star that says we want everyday Americans to live a better life. And that's why I work where I work, because the question you asked is premised on having majorities in the Senate and the House and the White House. And we made tremendous progress in this most recent midterm cycle. And one of my favorite things tonight, I am going as a guest of Speaker Pelosi. And one of my favorite reasons I want to be there tonight is I want to just see her sitting there. I feel pretty damn good watching her in the chair and seeing the diverse quilt of the Democratic House members. But we've got more work to do. We can take the Senate. We can take the White House. We can win more state houses and state governorships. Our democracy continues to be on fire. That is the State of the Union. And Democrats are going to put out that fire because we have first responders in Congress, in state houses, and in grassroots America that understands that this is the most dangerous moment in our democracy. And we're going to keep fighting like heck.
Remarkable. Well, have a wonderful time tonight. Congratulations on being Nancy Pelosi's guest, and keep up the great work, sir.
I am so grateful for your time.
My pleasure. And, the door is always open here. Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Democrats.org. You can tweet him at Tom Perez. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Perez.
Take care.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Okay, back with your calls on the State of the Union right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I think the State of the Union is complete economic anxiety. And, why I say that is because 55% of the workers aged 55 to 64, meaning the people about to retire, have zero saved for retirement. And, the unfortunate part is the Democrats have only been able to offer free market solutions like a 401k. But 401ks were designed for high-income earners to save money tax-free in addition to a pension.
Right.
And this is the whole lie that keeps getting sold to workers, like, everyone will be a millionaire by the time you retire because the market does so great.
Oh, I remember when they were pitching this during the Reagan administration. This is where it all started, with IRAs and then 401ks.
Yeah, but the problem is the low-wage workers can't donate anything or much of anything to their retirements. And since we've shifted the burden onto workers, I say we need to do a forced subsidy of 401ks to get it such that every worker can get to the maximum 401k contribution every year.
Well, that would be one way to do it. The other would be to simply, as Democrats are proposing to do right now, raise the payments that Social Security makes to the point that you can actually retire on Social Security in most parts of the country, and do that fund that by lifting the cap on who contributes when. They're talking now about raising it to $400,000. I'd raise it only to $250,000, or for that matter, just do away with it altogether. I don't see why somebody making between $120,000 a year and $400,000 a year doesn't have to pay into Social Security. That doesn't make any sense to me. But it's very straightforward stuff. But Lowell, spot on. That's a great statistic and important information. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you were asking everybody for their State of the Union. I have a simple 7-point one, and I've also got a rhetorical question for Donnie. Donnie, I know you like Fox and you don't listen to Free Speech TV, but some of your staff probably do. So you're a one-pager. You love Fox TV. You love eating fast food all day and tweeting. How does that qualify you to tell anybody what the State of the Union is?
Good question.
Here's
especially
my
now.
State of the Union.
Yeah, especially now that we know that
children in suicides going up, food banks at airports to feed government employees. We've got so-called Catholic students mocking Native Americans. We've got charter school scams, stealing taxpayer money and dumbing down kids. We've got Republican campers vandalizing national park land and facilities. And we've got a hostage taker in the Oval Office who, instead of negotiating in honest, earnest, good faith, he takes the government as hostage. We're tired of all this winning, Donnie. You're fired.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you, Johnny. Very well said. Patricia in Texas. Oh, Patricia, I'm going to put you back on hold. We're going to hit a break in 17 seconds here, and I'm sure what you're going to say, it won't be quite that quick. So, but Johnny really nailed it. This is such a bizarre administration. It's like every day there's some new horror. And, the latest being this guy from Koch Industries now overseeing the chemical part of the EPA. I mean, it's just bizarre. Anyhow, the State of the Union, we'll be back with your calls and your thoughts on that in just a moment. It's coming up on 48 minutes past the hour. Stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Patricia in Tuxedo Park, New York. Hey, Patricia, what's on your mind today?
Okay, I have a question and two observations. First of all, my question is, with the kidnapped children, if they're not going to be returned to their families, do they automatically become citizens? Do they get birth certificates issued to them? What happens to them? They might not even know when their birthdays are or their names. What happens to these poor kids?
I'm quite certain that the answer is no, they don't. How they're going to be dealt with in the immigration system is a really good question. I don't have a clue. But, in order to get citizenship, there's a rather substantial process. Geez, that's a really good question, Patricia. I had not thought about that. What's going to happen to these kids as they grow up? Wow.
Because they'll just be lost in the system. What happens when they go to get a job? Will they have a social security number? Will they be able to go to school?
Right. Yeah, all those things. Those are really important questions. I don't know the answer to any of them.
Okay. In any case, I have two observations. One is that that meeting, the recent meeting with Putin, where we had no translator. I believe Melania speaks Russian. Perhaps she was the translator.
Well, she's Slovenian. I don't know if...
she speaks 5 different languages, though.
Yeah. Well, and Russia may well be one of them, because Slovenia was part of the Soviet Union. Okay.
Uh-huh. And that's tongue-in-cheek. And then another thing is, as long as people continue to listen to, like Fox News as it is now, unless we have the fairness doctrine reinstated, I don't think a lot of people are going to change their minds because they still view everything as fake news.
Yeah, I agree. And they're continuing to do, as George W. Bush said, catapult the propaganda. And they're doing it really, really well. Patricia, thank you. Excellent points, all. Neela in Redding, California. Hey, Neela, what's up?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for answering my call. I was kind of upset with your program yesterday, and I was as upset as you were. And so I slept on it last night and came to the conclusion that the positive way to answer this were the children is for maybe Trump when he's up there tonight, just to come out and say, okay, everybody just call in and tell me where all the kids are. And I'm being sarcastic that way, but I think the rebuttal needs to address that, and also that the foster care system a story needs to be written, because it's been privatized. And when I went through the system, I was a ward of the court, and I think we had that kind of checks and balance on that whole. Now it's been privatized, and also different religious groups have taken the mantle of all these children, and so they're and so
it varies wildly from state to state, by the way, Neil.
And then it's pretty sticky kind of a thing, but I do want to say it in a positive way, that we have to maybe appeal to morality and have these people come forward and say, yes, we have these children. You said that it would probably take a year, in your calculation, to find where all these children are. At the same time, I think it would take a day, or maybe the longest a week, for people to come forward and say, yes, we have these children.
Yeah, that's assuming that they do. I mean, if some of these children have been sold, if they've been trafficked, I
think you're absolutely right. The adoption system is a racket.
The whole thing is an absolute mess. And to repeat, I forget who tweeted it, but to repeat this tweet that I shared with you earlier. Hillary Clinton loses 30,000 emails, and by the way, we've since found them. She, this is why Comey said, "Oh, there's no there." But Hillary Clinton loses 30,000 emails, and they say lock her up. Donald Trump has 48,000 people in concentration camps and loses thousands of children, and nobody's talking about it. Well, that's something for the immigrant community to worry about. Neela, it's a big deal.
He's asking for that money on his website. All he has to do on that website, instead of ask for $35 or something, just post how many children.
Right. Do you have one of the kids? No, I get it, Neela. Thank you for the call. Wayne in Redding, California, listening on KFOI. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, Tom. State of the Union. the thing that I noted this morning in your early comments reminded me of a comment that a friend of mine who was a therapist said. He said that anger is a secondary emotion. It covers up sadness, shame, blame,
and fear.
And it's symptomatic. And in the national discourse, I would say that the anger we're dealing with right now is hiding despair, as evidenced by the opioid epidemic and the suicide rate.
Yep.
The compulsive, grabbing of our Second Amendment, as a security blanket against, the revenuers or the bad guys coming to get me and mine. I have to have a gun. When in fact, if they roll the tanks, you and yours are going to be done.
Yeah.
So I just, I look at this and I go, yes, anger is appropriate in this circumstance, but don't forget how much despair people are dealing with, how much anxiety and fear and all the other things that are under the anger.
Yeah,
and
spot on. No, I agree with you on all points, Wayne. Very well said. Thank you. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, yeah, Stacey Abrams, the rebuttal. Now, if you want the real State of the Union address, all we have to do is tune into her.
Yeah.
It's ironic that she is not even an elected official, and she's going to be giving the rebuttal. So that tells you that the Democrats know that she's going to tell the truth.
Well, and also this is her audition to run for United States Senate from Georgia next year. Is it 2020 or 2022? I think it's 2020 that Sonny Perdue, as I recall, is up for re-election, or one of them, one of the Georgia senators.
Plus, she's a female. Plus, she's African-American, which those two things go against what Donald Trump stands for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Kamala Harris is doing a pre-buttal an hour before the State of the Union. She's going to be giving a speech. I'm sure you can easily Google that or DuckDuckGo it or whatever.
Yeah.
And Bernie's going to do one after Stacey Abrams.
I'm curious, is it true that Trump found a child out there with the last name Trump, and he's going to use that in his State of the Union address?
Yes, this kid says that he's being bullied because of his last name, and so Donald Trump is going to bring him in and wave him around, like a bloody shirt and say, feel sorry for me and for my family and for this little kid and all this kind of stuff. And it's
unbelievable. You have a good day, sir.
It's bizarre. Thanks a lot, Steve. Good to hear from you. Thanks for listening to WCPT. Remarkable stuff. So tonight, the State of the Union, as I mentioned, an hour before the State of the Union, Kamala Harris is giving a pre-buttal. That's going to be worth watching. Then, of course, Trump, maybe a good time to go out to dinner or go to the bar. And then after that, you've got Stacey Abrams with the rebuttal, and then after that will be Bernie Sanders.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. Two questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flaunting the Constitution's requirements. And he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. We became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he is engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here's a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who is investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. a second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice, and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The case for impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We were talking with Tom Perez, the director of the DNC, just a few minutes ago, and we've been soliciting your opinions on what do you think the State of the Union is. You heard my rant on it. In addition to talking about the State of the Union, there's a possibility that tonight or at some point in the near future, Donald Trump may declare a state of emergency. So, I wanted to learn what that means and how it all works. So, with us is the counsel, the attorney of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center. His name is Andrew Boyle. BrennanCenter.org is the website. You can tweet him at J_Andrew_Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E, or at Brennan Center. Prior to the Brennan Center, he spent 7 years prosecuting senior Khmer Rouge leaders on behalf of the UN for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, following a year serving in the trial chambers of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, working on cases from that 1994 genocide. And pretty amazing stuff here. Andrew, it's an honor to have you with us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. So what is a state of emergency? I know that we've got something like 30 or 40 of them that are in existence right at this moment, that this goes back quite some time, maybe even to World War II. What's the history of these? What does this mean? And what would the consequence of Donald Trump declaring one be? I'm assuming there's all different, there's a whole gradation of different types of states of emergency.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. States of emergency currently are declared under something called the National Emergencies Act, and that was an act passed in 1976. And there are currently 31 active emergencies under that act. It's not, however, the case that when a president declares a national emergency, he automatically gets to do whatever he wants. All it does is then give him access to certain statutory powers that Congress has passed over the time and said that the president has access to these when he declares a national emergency. And obviously, in the current circumstances, what he is considering is using some of these specific statutory powers to, from his perspective, hopefully allocate money that he wasn't able to get Congress to pass to build the wall on the southern border.
Okay. So what does that mean?
So that means that if the president were to go down this path, he could declare a national emergency. He would have to formally transmit that to Congress. And he would also have to identify which of these specific laws. So there's 136 laws that he would have access to. When he declares a national emergency, he would have to identify which of those specific laws he intends to use. And then he could try to use the specific provisions of those laws to move money around. However, almost certainly this would be challenged in at least a couple of ways. First of all, there's a provision in the National Emergencies Act of 1976 which would allow Congress to terminate the national emergency. However, they would have to have a veto-proof majority in order to do that, because almost certainly President Trump would try to veto any act that they would pass to try to terminate that emergency. The other way is through litigation. There would almost certainly be plaintiffs that would come forward that would challenge the use of both the declaration of the national emergency, claiming that this was not a true national emergency, for example, because immigration is at historic lows, and also the use of the particular statutory powers to, say, move money around from Army civil works projects to building the wall.
So does he, if he declares a state of emergency largely for the purpose of moving money around, does that give him access to a whole range of new powers, arguably even extra constitutional powers that he might not have otherwise had?
It does give him access to the specific laws that Congress has passed over time, wherein they have said when the president declares something along the lines of when the president declares a national emergency, he can X, Y, Z. It doesn't give him access to just do whatever, the ability to just do whatever he wants at that point. But of course, the Congress, when it passed the National Emergencies Act, was assuming that we would have a president that would act in good faith, a president that would use these powers in true emergencies for limited amounts of time. And under the current circumstances, if the president were to try to use emergency powers to allocate money that he was not able to get Congress to allocate, it would be a clear violation of the spirit, if not the law, of the National Emergencies Act and the powers under which he has access to under that act. What
are the most concerning of those XYZs? I mean, he's not going to have the power to suspend habeas corpus, is he? Is he going to have the power to toss people in Gitmo that he doesn't like? I mean, what can he do that we should be really worried about?
Right. No. So the ability to suspend habeas corpus is clearly allocated to Congress in the Constitution. So that is not one that he would have the ability to do under the National Emergencies Act. There are quite troubling statutory provisions, however. For example, there are statutory provisions that would allow him to take control of radio stations, as might be particularly concerning to someone in your situation. There are also statutory powers that would allow him to perform biological and chemical tests on unwitting American citizens. And in addition, there are powers that would allow him to essentially prevent anyone within the United States or an American citizen even from being employed, from earning a living of any sort, from being able to have a home or rent a home. So there are some quite dire circumstances that some of these powers.
So he could basically individually designate you, Andrew Boyle, or me, Thom Hartmann. He could say, "Okay, Hartmann, I didn't like what you said on the radio yesterday. You are not allowed to engage in commerce anymore." It sounds to me like that's what you're saying. You know, your bank is going to freeze your accounts. Your landlord is going to kick you out. You can't rent a house. You can't buy a car. You can't do anything. You are no longer a person. Is that what you're talking about?
That is what I'm talking about, and in fact, although that particular law, that's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, is routinely used in terms of foreign citizens. It has been used against individuals within the United States. However, there would be clear due process concerns if it was used against an American citizen, because as an American citizen, you have certain rights that foreigners located outside of the country do not have. And in fact, when that law has in the past been used to target persons within the United States, when it went up to the appeals courts, the government stopped using it against people within the United States because they were concerned about the constitutionality of what they were doing.
But under a state of emergency, those concerns would go away or be diminished?
Under a declared state of emergency is the only way that he has access to those powers. But certainly, it's true that in any sort of legal challenge, when you're dealing with the courts, courts historically have been very deferential to the executive, to the president, when he's using powers under a claim of national emergency. And that's a troubling aspect of the way that emergency powers can be used generally.
Remarkable. Finally, as a prosecutor of basically war crimes, I mean, you spent 7 years prosecuting Khmer Rouge leaders and prior to that, Rwandans. And those were substantial genocides. I mean, my recollection is around 2 to 3 million people were killed by the Khmer Rouge, and hundreds of thousands in the Rwandan genocide. I'm wondering if, in your opinion, any of the things that have happened here in the United States in the last, say, decade and a half or two, let's say 2 decades, going back to 9/11. So that it would include, things like the black sites, Gitmo, torture, or for that matter, now we've got 48,000 people who have committed no crime at all. They've come to the United States applying for asylum, who are in long-term, perhaps indefinite detention in these concentration camps, 2/3 of which are owned by private corporations. We've got several thousand children that the administration says now they have lost, and they cannot afford the manpower. It would take over 100 people, researching their cases to find them, and the administration doesn't have the money to do that, they say. I mean, is any of this stuff rise to the level of attention from an international criminal court?
Well, there's certainly a sliding scale. I don't believe that the United States is anywhere near the types of atrocities that transpired in either Rwanda or in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. But you're absolutely right that there's incredibly troubling human rights violations that have transpired in recent years and in former years, including torture. And the United States, it seems, recently is also taking a step back in being a leader in human rights in the world, in the way that the government is embracing autocrats around the world, encouraging autocrats not only in relation to crimes against humanity or something like that, but also in relation to human rights such as free speech, democracy, things like that. And I would absolutely hope that in the coming years we see the United States return to its place at the forefront of human rights in the world.
Yeah. Amen. It would be a fine thing. Andrew Boyle is the counsel of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center. BrennanCenter.org is the website. You can tweet him at J_Andrew_Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E. Andrew, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you for having me.
It's great talking with you and great getting an authoritative voice on these issues that can be sometimes a little convoluted or confusing. 17 minutes past the hour, back with your calls and thoughts on the State of the Union after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Talk media for the sane among us. This is the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. And welcome back, John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm well.
Just 2 quick points. One, as an African-American man, and what I've seen with the government and how vastly things have been destroyed, I kind of believe our State of the Union is in the ICU.
I'm sorry?
Seriously.
I must have missed a word there. Say that again, John.
I believe that our State of the Union is in the ICU.
Oh, so we're in intensive care right now.
Oh yeah, but 2020, that's where you're gonna know whether or not if they're gonna pull the plug.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Although, let's all keep in mind there's probably 6, 7, 8 million people who have been prevented from voting and probably will still be being prevented from voting by all these Republican voter suppression efforts. In fact, the number could be, as high as 30, 40 million people, depending on, whether you're looking at voters or people who are potential voters. But I think you're right, John. 2020 is going to be the thing that makes it or breaks it. John, thank you. Very well said. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Hi, Tom. My State of the Union would be twofold. One of action and meaningful reform. I would say that federal money would be administered toward cooperatives, green cooperatives, a network of them in the country, and a bold statement that China is a friend, not a threat, as the Republicans they've been spreading rumors that China is a threat, and they are not a threat, they are a friend.
How do you know that?
I want that to go on the books.
What makes you think that China's our friend?
They've been our friend. We do business with them.
Okay. We don't share a common value system with them, though. I mean, this is a country where if you tweet something about the government that the government doesn't like, you can die.
I don't believe that.
Really?
I see that as a rumor.
Really?
I don't think so. I do not. I've seen a lot of documentaries on China. My sister was over there, and you were over there too, Tom.
Yeah, I spent the month of November in 1986 there. And people were terrified.
Threat, Tom.
Oh no, this was just before Tiananmen Square. I remember taking one of the doctors out for lunch and having a conversation about politics, and he got so scared he was like, "I can't talk about this." He was shaking. At the possibility
Why can't they be a friend?
Well,
that's not a reason.
I think it's because they have a completely different value system than we do.
Pardon me?
I'm not talking about Chinese people or China, but I'm talking about the government of China is being run on a different value system.
What I'm talking about.
It certainly seems to me to be essentially a violent dictatorship. They've got over 1 million Uyghurs in re-education camps, in concentration camps, over 1 million people, just because they're not ethnically Chinese. And because they're Muslims. I don't see them as friends, Catherine. Respectfully, I disagree with you, but, on your other points, I think, spot on. Catherine, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 23 minutes. No, it's 21 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So what's our State of the Union? Kenyatta in Redlands, California. What do you think is the State of the Union?
I think the State of the Union is the actual national emergency that Mr. Trump wants to declare. So
interesting.
That's as succinct as I could be. But I want to kind of give you my thoughts on two things I know that will be mentioned in one way or the other in this State of the Union address. I haven't seen the speech. I don't even know if it's out. But certainly he's going to talk about the United States being a nation of immigrants, because every State of the Union by every president that I can remember has included that statement, and particularly now with this wall thing. And I wanted to segue that, Tom, into, because I know we're talking about the State of the Union, but I wanted to segue that into the comments that were made by, not comments, but this picture with his governor in Virginia. Mm-hmm. There's kind of a parallel because, that picture, everyone's up in arms about that picture. But black people in this country are constantly being insulted in subtle ways. When I hear the president make that statement tonight, and he will, in one way or another, a nation of immigrants, every time I hear that includes everyone but me. Ancestrally, we were not immigrants here. We are unique that way. So there's always these subtle insults. And I tell you something, a lifetime of that is really difficult to handle. So I wanted to say that. And also the other thing that you're going to hear is African American unemployment is at an all-time low.
Right.
That's what we're going to hear. So now, do you know what that translates to me, Tom? How that translates to me? What that means is, well, heck, if the N-words are doing well, what does that mean for everybody else? We're all doing great.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's wow. I think you're absolutely right, Kenyatta. And I other than saying yes, and your first point that the State of the Union is that we are in a crisis. We are in an emergency. I think that's a really important one too. Kenyatta, excellent points. Thank you very much. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's up?
The word for today is the Jewish two-letter word, oy.
Okay, because...
Oy! It's the perfect word. You can say it over and oy! You can say it a million different ways. It's perfect.
Yeah.
20-second rant?
Sure. Go for it.
Thank you, Guru. We, all of us, should be asking every chance we get to every conservative and news person we see, why do conservatives hate the constitutional imperative to promote the general welfare? They have much of the nation believing the lie that Democrats are soft on crime and don't want to provide for the common defense, while we are not hammering home this truth. And that's why the bumper sticker should be, in quotes, promote the general welfare,
Amen.
dash the Constitution.
Yeah, there's only really two things that people who call themselves conservatives care about. Outside of bigotry, right? A lot of conservatives, bigotry is a big one, whether it's anti-black or anti-gay or anti-immigrant or whatever. But basically, it's cheap labor and low taxes. I mean, that's it. That's all they care about. Cheap labor, low taxes. And I think, frankly, we should call them, the money-grubbing conservatives or something like that. David, thank you. Oi, yeah, okay, I get it. What is the State of the Union for you? What is your State of the Union? My thoughts on the State of the Union, I have already shared with you, but I think that the State of the Union is that we are worried. We are very concerned. We're concerned that the economy is going to crash. We're concerned that Trump is going to do something crazy.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're concerned that he sold our country out to other countries. We're concerned that Mike Pence is going to destroy the rights of women. We're concerned about the children who've been ripped from their parents' arms. We're concerned. Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachov's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logachev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 roentgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 roentgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logachev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 roentgens an hour, an impossible number. Logachev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to Western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
"34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. John in Jackson, Michigan. Hey, John, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I'm a retired engineer, and I want to express the philosophy of engineers. If you have a problem, you cannot solve it unless you find the root cause. In this country, we're chasing ourselves. We're chasing lies from both parties. If you remember the movie, The Pit and the Pendulum, I liken the Democrats and the Republicans on each side of that pendulum, and we, the people, are underneath, getting sliced in half. We are divided and conquered. We chase things like the wall.
John, what's your point?
Well, my point is this. I sent you an email last week and expressed the definition of the United States. Under 28 U.S.C. Section 3002, you will find there our supposed government's definition. And the United States is no longer a government. It's a federal corporation. It runs that way, minimizing our wages.
John, do you believe if your name is spelled in all caps that you are free of government control?
No, Tom. There's illusions we face every day, but we are chasing the wrong enemy. The worst enemy I profess you can have is the one behind you that's telling you what to do all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
We're
John, thanks. I'm not going to go there. I don't believe that the government is a corporation and that we're all screwed therefore. John in San Francisco. Hey, John, thanks for listening to Real Talk 910 AM. What's up?
Good morning, Tom. John Blowtorch here. I just wanted to point out that we need to really pin this whole situation in D.C. on the Republicans, not just Trump, because this is our opportunity as Democrats to show what we stand for and what the Republicans stand for. And if we point out all the corruption and all the greed and everything that's going on, taking place, and then offer ourselves up as a place for fairness and prosperity, I think we'll come a lot farther. We'll get a lot farther in having a better system. And I think it's time that the Dems start putting out literally what they stand for, like fair elections and education for all and universal health care.
I agree.
Like
I agree. These are, and that's why I think it was so good that Tom Perez came on and literally just went through that list, as you point out. John, I totally agree with you. It's time for the Democrats to start, and they have been for some time, but to loudly speak about what they're in favor of. Thank you, John. Rob in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Rob.
Hey, hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
So
What's up?
I'm calling because I want to answer your question about my opinion on what the State of the Union is. And my issue is that no matter what sort of Congress we have going on, I think the biggest lie that they have told us is the way spending works, where they always get into this whole, well, how we're going to pay for it because somebody's taxes are going to have to go up to fund this or fund that. But when you're talking about the sovereign issuer of a currency, the federal government does not need to tax you in order to be able to get the things done that it needs to get done. So what we need to focus on isn't this conversation about whose taxes need to go up to pay for this. We need to talk about, do we have the political will to get done what the American people already support? Medicare for all, college, gun reform, these sorts of things. And so I think Congress needs to, and I think thanks to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we're finally going to shift to having more honest conversations, and we can finally start to change the narrative of how we can get things done. It's not a fiscal will, it's a political will. And once we start focusing on that, we can finally start to get things done that led to the sort of issues that let Trump rise up in the first place, like the de-escalation and the deregulation and the outsourcing of all the jobs. Those sorts of things won't happen if we first tackle how spending works in the first place. So
I agree with you, Rob. That said, though, there is still a role for taxes. Taxes will fund the government and will decrease the deficit, but more importantly, taxes influence behavior. When we had a top tax rate of 94% or 91% during the Nixon administration, during the Kennedy administration, during the Eisenhower administration, when we had that, we had the fastest growth of the middle class in the history of the United States. And it was because the rich couldn't take that money out of their companies without having to pay enormous amounts of taxes. So they used the money to pay their workers, and they used the money to build their factories and grow things. And then, Reagan came in, dropped that top tax rate, and the rich just started stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. And now you've got all these billionaires. We've got, thousands of billionaires now that literally didn't exist in 1980. And so I think that there's, yes, absolutely everything you said, and there's a place for taxes. And I'm glad to hear you agree with that. Rob, thank you for the call. John in Maryville, Tennessee. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, I've kind of got like a question. Do you think that the Democratic response tonight should include just some pushback on the lies that most probably our president will tell in his State of the Union address? I
think absolutely, if you're talking about Stacey Abrams, I think absolutely she needs to be flexible enough that she can grab a few lies out of the State of the Union and actually call them that, because I guarantee you Donald Trump is going to lie to us. Number one. But, number two, I think that one of the things that she is uniquely qualified to talk about is election fraud. And, because she was the victim of massive election fraud down in Georgia, where, hundreds of thousands of people were thrown off the voting rolls, over 40,000 people who registered to vote, almost all of them African American. Brian Kemp refused to put on the voter rolls, refused to allow these people to vote, or if they did try to vote, they were given a provisional ballot that was never counted. It was just an epic scam. And I hope that she brings this up. I'm guessing she probably won't because, that would seem kind of parochial. But I think that this is one of the biggest issues right now. The only reason that the Republicans still have control of the Senate, in my opinion, the only reason Donald Trump is in the White House is because of election fraud, because of voter suppression being done by Republicans. And I hope she brings that up. John, thanks for the call. Jenny in Clio, Michigan. Hey, Jenny, what's up?
I just wanted to, basically, I've sorted through all this stuff I had to say. I really appreciate your program. I just was one of these, I'm almost 70. I was a martyr and all the other stuff back in the 60s. And I am so frustrated when I saw, and I'm not trying to be specific, but Tom Perez, just as a Democrat of the Democratic National Committee, I want to know how, because I lived through the status quo of all this and worked 2 to 3 jobs and raised my daughter by myself, and I'm paying like $800 to $900 a month in medical premiums for her and myself. She has challenges. So I lived with these people, and all I got from the Dems, the status quo, the Republicans, corporate. Now, I could consider myself now a Democrat, a social Democrat, but I want to be able to do some things to try and promote more progressives in the Senate and in Congress. Is there a way to go about that? I don't know if you could even give me an idea aside from getting onto the sites and moveon.org and different things like that.
Well, there's 2 ways to support progressives in Congress. One would be to identify individual progressives that you really are excited by, and let their campaigns know. People in the House are up for re-election every 2 years, in the Senate it's every 6. Let their campaigns know that when the time comes, you're available to do canvassing if it's local to you, or if you're trying to help out somebody on the other side of the country that you're willing.
The ACLU was here before.
Right, you can do phone banking and things like that from home. So that's number one, is that's going direct with a candidate, or picking a couple of candidates and saying, I'm going to be one of the people who helps this individual. The second way to do that is kind of meta to that, which is to find an organization. Daily Kos is doing stuff. You got MoveOn.org. You've got Indivisible. You've got Democracy from Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org. You've got OurRevolution.org. I mean, there's a lot of great organizations out there that you can help, physically help, do phone banking and things, or you can contribute money to. So there's a lot of ways to do that, Jenny. Jenny, a great question. Thank you for calling and asking it. Richard in New York City. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Before I make my comment, I just want to qualify it by saying
although my background is in television production and doing some pretty heavyweight things. I went to graduate school for industrial psychology, and specialized in the authoritarian personality and so forth. What I want to ask is, why doesn't the approach to Trump to expose him for what he is a classic antisocial personality disorder, sociopath, or malignant narcissist? He fits the qualifications very clearly and specifically, yet people aren't warned what this man, the traits that this man has publicly and privately. I mean, you can see them very clearly. You don't have to be a educated psychologist or a psychiatrist to make the diagnosis.
So we have a little less than a minute, Richard. What are those traits that we should know about?
Well, number one, pathological liar. That's the easy one. I mean, very obvious.
Yeah, the Washington Post has documented 8,000 lies.
Pardon me?
The Washington Post has documented over 8,000 lies in the last 2 years. Yep.
Yeah, right. Number two, the narcissists tend to be grandiose. They're the expert. They know everything. No one knows more than what it parrots exactly what we all hear Trump say about his own talents. Mm-hmm. Am I wrong there, or does he appear grandiose to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Third of all, they tend to shift if anything goes wrong, they shift responsibility onto other people. They never take responsibility for either mistakes or anything that's wrong. They always blame.
Yeah, you're batting 1,000 here, Richard.
Huh?
You're batting 1,000. Richard, we're out of time, but thank you for that little bit of instruction from your psychology classes and your work. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching us on Manhattan Neighborhood Network there in Manhattan, in New York City. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And 4 minutes hence, we will be talking with Luke Vargas with Talk Media News to find out what's going on in the rest of the world. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Al in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Al, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
I would like to say thank you, Tom, for for your relentless work on the radio. I know it gets a little exasperating at times, but I'd like to say what we should be focusing on is number one is that who created the Frankenstein. We should not be surprised that this guy says what he says, and I'm shocked that people are shocked, and to see people, this is no surprise. This guy, it's just in his nature to be the way he is. Why were we not surprised when the Tea Party came out and Sarah Palin put crosshairs on Democratic districts, and you had Steve King, using all sorts of provocative rhetoric, and then you had the Sharon Angle, who said that we should resort to our what do you call it? Our
Second Amendment remedies.
Yeah. And then Michelle Bachmann saying that we should resort to bullets rather than ballots. I mean, he resembles everything what the Republican Party, Tea Party, has already assembled, don't you think? I mean,
I do.
And number two, there's the fact that we have 240,000 annual water main breaks in the United States every year.
240,000 what?
240,000 annual water main breaks in the United States.
Oh, water main breaks. Okay, got it.
Water main breaks in the United States everywhere.
In other words, our infrastructure is falling apart.
Our infrastructure.
Well, it has been since Reagan. I mean, Reagan cut taxes, and then governments couldn't afford to pay for infrastructure, and so now we're $3 trillion in the hole, infrastructure-wise.
Okay, here's another point that we the far left have to stop allowing our unreasonable expectations to become our worst nightmare. If we didn't learn from the Bush administration, who blew the banks, put us into to fund their wars, and basically failed to protect us from the worst attack on American soil, but yet we gave them the keys to the White House again. Here's where we go. We created the Frankenstein because we allowed this to happen. So if you want to ask who created the Frankenstein, we're all
I'm not quite as enthusiastic about blaming myself and other Democrats for the State of the Union. Frankly, if Republican voter suppression, and maybe you could say this is the Democrats' fault for not screaming loudly enough about it, but if Republican voter suppression had not been happening for the last 30 years, and if the Supreme Court had not gutted the Voting Rights Act, if Republicans had been basically forced to operate within the law, in my opinion, you would have a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate right now.
All right, so I'd like to say to the rancid sector of the far left that don't blame the Democrats for what the Supreme Court did, because Citizens United basically, I mean, that opened up Pandora's box, and that's where unlimited amounts of money, whether it be foreign or here in the United States, could be used, and the Republicans took advantage of that Citizens United to the fullest. I mean, they literally, and then the McCutcheon Amendment, which says money is speech. Do you see where I'm getting at? We have to stop allowing our unreasonable expectations to dig it. I mean, we got to put the shovel down, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that it's time for us all to be very clear about what's going on. That the Republican Party since Reagan has had one mission and one mission only, and that is to strip America and Americans of as much wealth as possible and place it in the hands of a couple of, 10,000 or more, or in that neighborhood, very, very rich individuals, and probably fewer than 500 corporations. That has been their mission, and they've been very successful at it. And we need to own that. We need to acknowledge that, and then we need to go forward to reverse that. Luke Vargas is up next with Talk Media News right after this. Stick around. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The consequence. Welcome back. Let's check in with Luke Vargas at Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. Luke is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joins us from the UN headquarters in New York. You can hear his 2-minute podcast every day by searching Luke Vargas, wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, Luke, welcome back.
Thank you.
So the State of the Union tonight, what are you going to be listening most closely for? I mean, you're the international affairs guy. What is it, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Syria, what?
Yeah, a little of all of those. I mean, I think on Venezuela I have the most questions just because this U.S. obsession on this country has really just escalated so quickly that I think we need to do something of a gut check here, and I want to really try and get a sense. And again, I don't really go into State of the Unions expecting all that much clarity on major issues, but it would be useful to get a sense, given that this speech will be kind of a group effort from Trump's top advisors. I know Bolton is expected to basically just write giant passages of entire parts of this foreign policy. It's good to get a sense of risk tolerance, because as I see it, the White House keeps emphasizing that we're working with other governments on this policy, and to the extent that we've convinced other countries to go along with the Guaido recognition, I suppose that's true, but I also see the U.S. as having really gone far and above other countries in taking on risk here. For instance, with respect to humanitarian aid, we keep hearing, the U.S. and other countries are delivering aid, trying to mobilize aid to help the people of Venezuela. Well, look at actually what countries are doing. Canada yesterday put $53 million towards aid to Venezuela, but it's going to countries in the region who are taking in refugees. Germany, for instance, is putting a hold on aid that was going to go to the Maduro government. But the U.S. is doing something entirely different also, which I think is the riskiest, sending aid to this Colombian border town, and then we're sort of waiting to see if there's going to be an attempt made, and by whom, to actually bring medicine over the border where the Venezuelan army is mustering. And so you can sort of say, oh, we're all in this together, but it's really the U.S., possibly even the U.S. military, with respect to that border aid delivery, that I think is putting its neck out there. And I really want to just get a sense if there's an expectation that we're sort of willing to let that aid sit there in Colombia and be something of a photo op, and nothing more than that.
Or could this become the next Gulf of Tonkin incident? If we try to cross the border, somebody gets killed, it's suddenly, remember the Maine. I mean, we've been in 2 wars as a consequence of this kind of stuff, even if they were made up in both cases, the Spanish-American War and Vietnam.
Yeah, you're right. Are we comfortable letting it be a statement piece that might just sort of sit there? A little bit like we got countries to say they're not going to recognize Crimea, but we didn't push to arm groups immediately or intervene ourselves, and we just sort of, for years to come, point back to that and say, hey, well, we didn't okay this.
Right.
And I think that will come down to sort of a decision on the part of the U.S. whether we're willing to take a more sustained, possibly smarter approach. I don't know, maybe work with China to try and convince them not to deal with Maduro, or do we bluster in and, aggravate the situation, which really, I think, at the end of the day would probably just bolster Maduro. So that's something I'll be listening for. On Afghanistan, we're getting a sense, and I think we saw this in a tweet over the weekend from the president, that he really is now committed to an exit from that country, basically saying, hey, it's time to start coming home. This was a tweet, and quote, after many years to start spending our money wisely, end quote. Funny is the first part of that tweet, I think, reflected a complete misrepresentation of what's going on. He said, look, we're spending so much money there. We've bombed the heck out of them, and now they're basically suing for peace. That's not at all the prerequisite that's getting us to this withdrawal. But maybe does it matter? Are we willing to sort of let the exit rhetoric in Afghanistan sort of be a misrepresentation of the situation there, even if it leads to a pullout? I'll be curious to see how President Trump sort of explains this to the American people. And then finally, I guess I'm curious about North Korea, even a little bit more so than Syria. This is possibly a newsworthy foreign policy topic. There's been some suggestion we might get a date for this second direct meeting with Kim Jong-un to follow up from Singapore in this speech. And I will just be sort of curious. This is, just a personal curiosity primarily. What kind of, logical gymnastics the president has to go through to try to justify why a second meeting is really necessary right now. I mean, it just does not, listening to the U.S. envoy to North Korea talk a few days ago, it's clear the U.S. keeps sort of switching what our strategy is, what bar we're willing, or insisting that they cross before we agree to meet again. I don't really see the groundwork having been sufficiently laid for this meeting. Let's hear what the president has to say.
Yeah. And finally, we have about 45 seconds. Who is David, is it Malpass? Malpass?
Yeah, that he is the likely new nominee to lead the World Bank. Here's a great bit from his resume. He was the economic advisor to Trump in the 2016 campaign. He was chief economist. This is the funny part. Chief economist at Bear Stearns when that investment bank went belly up during the financial crisis. He's very mistrusting of multilateral institutions. I'm curious where he takes this. If he says, look, we need to counter China, they're the ones doing One Belt, One Road, we don't like the terms they're giving, and thus we're going to present a better alternative, that's great. The real fear is he takes a World Bank that really is trying to refocus on dealing with climate change, long-term sort of energy transition issues, and just says, screw it, I don't want anything to do with that. That's the worst case.
We're just going to start funding nuclear power plants and big dams again, right?
Exactly. That's the fear. They did stop oil and gas investments this year. We'll see if he reverses that.
Yeah, amazing. Luke Vargas, thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. Ocean Robbins is going to be with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. For our book club today, we're reading from a book edited by Cynthia McKinney. It's a compiled collection of essays titled "How the U.S. Creates, Shall we say, S-hole countries." I can't say that word on the air. And this is from her introduction. A deeper look at Trump's epithet, S-hole country. I wish I could take full credit for the idea of doing a book on President Trump's unfortunate characterization of some countries as S-hole countries, verified recently by fired ex-White House staffer Omarosa Manigault. The idea was brought to me by a Facebook friend, and I immediately saw the brilliance of that idea. Although at the time the president tried to walk back the revelation that he used such language to describe certain countries, he couldn't help himself. And during the visit of Nigeria's president to the White House, he doubled down on that characterization, saying that certain countries were tough places to live. It was only recently that Omarosa confirmed that, yes, the president had described certain countries as asshole countries. The media had a field day with the, at the time, alleged remarks. Steve Dempsey of the Bay Area News Group compiled a slideshow of cartoons from national news outlets that lambasted the president. Lambasted, whatever it is. The Mercury News Online ran the slideshow that included hilarious cartoons by Rick McKee at the Augustus Chronicle and Bob Englehart with Kago Cartoons and others. Mark Schuller, writing in the Huffington Post, noted, Haiti has been targeted for its decisive role in challenging what Southern planters, including 8 U.S. presidents, called a peculiar institution. The Haitian Revolution was the first time slaves were able to permanently end slavery and forge an independent nation. It was also a tipping point in U.S. history, leading to the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, paving the way for U.S. manifest destiny stretching from sea to shining sea and eventual dominance. Chicago, the country's third largest city, was founded by a Haitian, Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable, who Haitian historian Marc Rosier called an agent of the Haitian government to pursue a pro-freedom international policy. End of quote from that. Jen Kirby went farther, and in an online media outlet, Vox, interview with a Stanford University history professor, the word eugenics was used as a descriptor for what Trump's characterization actually represented. Stanford professor Anna Minion said of the interview, what Trump said was basically a form of eugenics, in which he's saying, this is the population we want, people from places like Norway, white people. We don't want people from African countries or from Haiti. That's what's really symbolic here. Minion makes it clear that in the U.S. immigration debate, legality became a proxy for race without anyone overtly talking about it. Ryan Teague Beckwith and Maya Roden of Time magazine added their 2 cents worth to the discussion of the president's choice of words by choosing to discuss the immigration laws that occasioned Trump's telling words. They began the discussion this way. President Donald Trump's S-hole countries comment ricocheted around the world, spurring criticism from U.S. allies, rebuttals from Americans with roots in those countries, and condemnation from some in his own party. Reaction was swift around the world, including from those countries so characterized by the president. Zambia even humorously featured Trump's words in a tourism advertisement at appeal. My Facebook friend thought that the president's words should occasion a deeper look at what these so-called S-hole countries were, how they were created, and why they continue to exist. And that is exactly what the contributors to this book do. Sort of like the proverbial turtle sitting on a fence post, you know these countries didn't get the way they are without some help. And it's precisely that help from the U.S., its allies, its multinational corporations, its military, and United Nations peacekeeping operations in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it also controls, on which this book focuses. Thus, the U.S. relationship to conditions in these countries is clear from U.S. military occupation of Haiti, financing of death squads in El Salvador, and support for dictators in all of them, indeed, all across the African continent. Therefore, for our purposes, an S-hole country is a country whose residents present quality of living conditions that can be tied to historical or current U.S. foreign and military policies that have negatively impacted the ability of that state to deliver quality of life policies to its residents. In this regard, for too many U.S. residents, the U.S. itself could be characterized as an S-hole country, resulting from its deliberate choice to fund the war machine and corporate policies that produce negative consequences for the countries and territories, in some cases colonies, that are profiled here. The United States, as itself a S-hole country, could be explored in much depth in future efforts. The characterization of certain countries as S-hole countries has captured the imagination of the global community, whether the localities and individuals concerned are for or against U.S. President Donald J. Trump. This book seizes this unique moment when attention of people inside and outside the U.S. is focused on the president's alleged words to explain the structure of international politics, the conditions inside certain countries, specific U.S. policies that created or maintain those conditions, and the consequence of those policies on U.S. residents themselves. How the U.S. Creates S-hole Countries by Cynthia McKinney, or edited by.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have had quite a day. We've been talking about the State of the Union. What do you think is the State of the Union? We had talked with Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, about the, what the Democratic alternative essentially to the Republicans. We've been talking about the crimes of the Trump administration. We just had a former world, what is the International Criminal Tribunal. We had a prosecutor who for 7 years was prosecuting the Khmer Rouge leaders and Rwandan leaders for genocide, and we're talking about the crimes of the Trump administration. A lot going on. I want to shift gears just a little bit here for just a few minutes. Ocean Robbins is on the line with us. He's the co-founder and CEO of the Food Revolution Network. He's the author of a brand new book. It's called The 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World. OceanRobbins.com is the website. You can also tweet him at Ocean Robbins. Ocean, welcome to the program.
So glad to be with you, Tom.
It's great having you with us. You are, really an expert on food and how food affects us and how we get our food and the food system and all that sort of thing. The Lancet Commission, Lancet, the British medical journal, sort of the British version of the Journal of the American Medical Association, came out with an article that was funded, the research was funded by the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And what they concluded was that the three biggest threats to humanity right now, to the world population, are obesity, undernutrition, and climate change.
Yeah.
It seems to me that all three of these tie together into this bizarre system of producing food, transporting food, processing food, delivering food in the United States and around the world, for that matter. You want to enlighten us on how that might be?
Absolutely. Most people would not think that obesity and malnutrition would go together, but they do. Statistically, as a human, the poorer you are, and frankly, the browner your skin is, the more likely you are to suffer from malnutrition or basic starvation in many parts of the world. But in the developed world, the more likely you are to suffer from obesity and the symptoms of the standard American diet, a diet high in processed foods and sugars and factory-farmed animal products. And You know, the Global Institute of Health Metrics concluded that the American diet killed 678,000 Americans last year. So we are literally digging our own graves with our knives and forks. And it takes about 12 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of feedlot beef in the United States today in our factory farming system. So the other 11 are essentially being wasted. Chicken and pork are a little bit more efficient, but you still use 4 or 5 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of flesh, and the rest is being wasted. So we kind of have a protein factory in reverse. And what happens is that when we're eating all these calories from animal products, we're wasting so much food that could go to feeding the world's hungry. Right now, 83% of the world's agricultural land is being used in animal agriculture. So we could literally save 75% of that if, in theory, the whole world went vegan. An area of land equal to all of Europe, all of the United States, all of China, and all of Australia combined. That's how much land we would save just by moving away from animal agriculture.
Wow, and if we reclaimed that land and allowed it to turn back into forests and things, it would also reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. I mean, that...
Massively, in a huge way. You know, one of the central driving causes behind the destruction of the tropical rainforest is beef. A second driving cause is soy plantations. Guess where that soy's going?
To beef.
Cattle.
Yeah, to cattle. So, and at the level of the individual, how is it that eating proteins and fats that are the consequence of slaughtering animals, that eating those kinds of foods affect our bodies so differently than eating, you know, even a faux meat, you know, the phony chicken, phony beef products that you can buy from Loma Linda and companies like that, you know, the Seventh-day Adventists make it, or you know, getting your protein and your fats and things from plant matter. Why is it that cycling nutrients through animals and then eating those animals doesn't help our nutrition, instead hurts it, that it promotes obesity and diabetes and all these other things?
Well, there have been over 10,000 studies published in peer-reviewed medical journals on the impacts of foods on human health. And, you know, we can cherry-pick studies that point in different directions, but the overwhelming body of evidence is really clear. We need to eat less sugar and less processed junk. We need to eat less animal products, especially when they come from factory farms. And we need to eat more whole plant foods. And when we do that, we don't just walk lighter on the earth. We don't just help stop climate change. We also make an incredible difference for our health. And I wrote 31-Day Food Revolution to really put the power in your hands to make the changes that we know can make such a difference. You know, a lot of people don't just struggle with knowing what to do, but with doing what we know. You know, if everyone just needed to know, hey, we need to eat more vegetables and less sugar and processed junk, we wouldn't have a healthcare crisis in America. But unfortunately, a lot of us are fundamentally addicted to a toxic food culture. And so I'm trying to help you break free so you can become the author of your food life. And that's really why I wrote this book.
That's great. The book is 31-Day Food Revolution. We're talking with Ocean Robbins, the CEO and co-founder of the Food Revolution Network. Ocean, so you're saying that somebody who says, I'm a vegan, you know, I'm not going to eat these meat products because they're terrible for the earth, they're terrible for me, and then, you know, 50 or 70% of their diet is, you know, frozen vegan dinners and you know, processed foods and you know, donuts and stuff. Are they doing themselves any kind of a favor?
They might be doing their planet a favor, but they're not doing themselves a favor. And there are a lot of people who have gone vegan, and they think that just because they don't eat meat, they're like, you know, health heroes. But the reality is vegan donuts are still junk food. You know, Twinkies are vegan, I think, and they're certainly no health food. Neither is McDonald's French fries. And the reality is that it takes more than just avoiding animal products to be healthy. That's why you need to go towards a whole foods, plant-powered diet with lots and lots of vegetables if you want to optimize your
salads forever. Finally, tonight is the...
You also want to learn to love the foods that love you back. You know, so it doesn't have to be some kind of some kind of martyrdom, you know?
Yeah.
I'm interested in pleasure, honestly.
Yeah, good, well-done vegan food is spectacular. In fact, there are several restaurants now here in Portland that are just vegan, and it's amazing. Finally, tonight is the State of the Union. We are a week and a half away from a possible another government shutdown. When we look back at the last government shutdown, how did that impact our food supply?
It's a little scary. You know, our food supply is not exactly super safe to begin with. And particularly, I want to touch on the hazards of the factory farming system because, you know, chicken farmers they're not staying up all night trying to figure out how to torture chickens, but they want to stay in business. And in a competitive industry, what that means is that they've got birds packed in tiny amounts of space, about 1 square foot per bird. They get morbidly obese, they can't walk, they sit in their own excrement for their entire lives. No wonder more than 80% of our chicken is contaminated with pathogenic bacteria, most of which is also antibiotic resistant. So even under the best of circumstances, the food inspectors are watching birds whiz by at 3 per second. Most of these birds were sitting in their own poop all day long. It's not a pretty picture. But when you have a government shutdown, suddenly workers are furloughed or they are having to work without pay. And as we saw during the 35-day shutdown, thankfully there were a couple of food recalls that happened even during that time. But there's no way that our food safety is getting the level of attention it deserves. So if you've ever thought about moving in a plant-based direction, then and getting away from factory farms in particular, then anywhere around a shutdown, especially during and after a shutdown, is a particularly good time to move in that direction.
Makes a lot of sense. Ocean Robbins, the new book is The 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World. Ocean, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Great talking with you. Always great talking with you. We'll be back. What is your State of the Union? It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're kicking around what the State of the Union is, what it should be, how it got here, where we're going with it. We'll pick up your calls and a little more of a rant from me in a few minutes. And welcome back. Joe in Elyria, Ohio. Am I saying that right, Joe?
Elyria.
Elyria. Okay. What's up?
Well, I wanted to bring up a threat that I saw to the state of our union that no one seems to be talking about yet. I saw a investment company advertising municipal bonds as a investment product on Wall Street. And, you know, before and after World War II and for many years after, there was a great tradition where Americans invested in their government and by buying savings bonds. And it is tax season, and I just feel like if everyone in America was able, you know, I know budgets are tight and everything, but if we all just put a little bit of money back into our government so that as we politically take our government back, we can actually financially take our government back.
So how does one go about buying municipal bonds, you know, outside of buying the ETFs?
Well, as far as...
you call up the city and say, I want to buy a bond from you? I've never done this. I'm curious.
You can't buy a bond from a city, but if you do not vote for the taxes that a city requires to issue those bonds in the first place, then they have to look somewhere else for any kind of investment in those bonds to make your city government work, to build roads, to build infrastructure, to build schools. And it all takes, you know, people...
So you're not sure exactly how to go about buying a municipal bond?
I'm sorry?
You don't know how to go about buying a municipal bond. If I wanted to buy a Portland municipal bond, you don't know how to do that. It's a good idea. We agree it's a good idea.
There's two possibilities. Either you vote for the taxes that, you know, pay for those municipal bonds,
right,
or you let Wall Street invest in it. And I just feel like it's only a matter of time before you see municipal bond-backed securities.
Oh, they're already out there. There are ETFs for municipal bonds and for state bonds. In fact, you know, I was looking at the Oregon one a while ago because there's some tax benefits. Joe, thanks for the call. Susan in Alachua, Florida.
Alachua.
Alachua, thank you. Susan, what's up?
Well, I'm not going to be watching the State of the Union speech tonight.
I'll do it for you.
I'm going to be watching something on Netflix.
There you go.
And if there's anything that is relevant to us, then we're going to find out about it by watching you or Stephanie Miller or somebody else.
Yep.
But I'm definitely not going to be watching that, thing tonight.
Are you encouraging your friends and neighbors not to watch too?
Yes, I am.
Have you thought about having a party or something, or inviting people over, or are I'm wondering if people around the country are doing these kind of things. Hey, let's do anything but Trump. Right?
Anything but Trump. Yes. Well, I hadn't thought about doing that, but letting listeners know by talking to you might encourage some other people to not watch that.
Well, for 1 hour tonight, it's a great time to be looking at pieces of classic movies or your favorite Three Stooges clips or whatever it may be. Susan, thank you for the call. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy your Netflix tonight. We'll be right back. It is 20 minutes past the hour. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
A really good end homelessness in America. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And can I bring Neo Screener back up again? We'll try that and see what happens. Somehow I missed out on the what's going on. So what's your State of the Union? What does the State of the Union look like to you and for you? Neo Screener's not working for me, so I'm going to try. Nope, not working here. So what, are we going to shut everything down? Okay. All right. I'm going to bail out of this. My apologies. We will be picking up your phone calls in about 3 or 4 minutes, and if you're on the line, you're probably going to get dumped because we're resetting our phone system. There was a poll over at Daily Kos and as to who people want to be the Democratic nominee. And this is a topic that I think is, kind of top of mind for all of us. Kamala Harris, 27%. She won the poll. She's number one. Number two was Elizabeth Warren, 17%. Bernie Sanders, number 3, 13%. Joe Biden sliding down the list. He's at 11%. Sherrod Brown, 7%. Amy Klobuchar, 6%. Beto O'Rourke, 5%. Cory Booker, 3%. And Kirsten Gillibrand, 2%. This is quite a difference from, Joe Biden being on the top of the pile, or Elizabeth Warren, for that matter, being on the top of the pile just a month ago. So Kamala Harris has, really kind of taken the country by storm. And, has really taken the country by storm, and it's an interesting time. I'm curious who you would like to see. I also, my riff or my rant or whatever you want to call it about the State of the Union, I think that the number one thing that Americans are experiencing right now is concern, worry. Not quite fear. Maybe for some people it's fear. But mostly it's concern. what might this crazy guy in the White House do? This pathetic, empty grifter, this guy who quote works 2 hours a day, and much of that time is just sitting around talking to people. Doesn't read his briefings, doesn't listen to his advisors. I think a lot of us are very, very concerned about that. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, you're on the air. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. That was quick. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, I was calling as you and all the members of your community know, the State of the Union is dire.
Yes.
And we have the biggest grifter ever, the greatest con man in the history of the world in the Oval Office, and he thrives on chaos. So the last thing he wants to do is unite us. And not only did he sucker a lot of low-info voters on domestic issues like taxes and health care, as you were talking about, but, just even more dangerously, he's brought back all the neocons from the Bush Jr. and Reagan days.
Yeah, Elliot Abrams, John Bolton. These are the guys who just were ferociously in favor back in the day of the Vietnam War, although they didn't want to serve, and then of the Iraq War.
Yeah, and far from the Orange Menace's campaign promises to rein in our military adventurism, he's setting up these confrontations with Venezuela and Iran. No coincidence that they're the two of the four biggest oil suppliers in the world.
Yep.
And as you opened the show with yesterday, he's pulling us out of the INF treaty, the nuclear treaty, triggering a new arms race with Russia, which is exactly what Putin wants. So, in my opinion, Tom, our only response to all of that is to stay the course with Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and election integrity, fighting for our voting rights. And, the oligarchs want us fighting against each other in a me society, and we need to, what we need is a we society.
Yeah, and pull together.
What do you think?
Spot on. I think you said it very, very well, Jeff. I can't amplify on that. So thank you very much. Mark in San Diego. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today? Mark? No Mark. Okay, let's try Jim in Broomfield, Colorado. Hey, Jim, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Hey, State of the Union, I don't think it's that good, but I'm a little bit optimistic that things are getting better. Certainly the turnout for Democrats in November gives me some optimism. Obviously, I'm hoping that carries through to 2020 and Trump goes away, like most of us want. And specifically what I did want to say is I think a powerful thing would be for everybody to not watch the State of the Union tonight. I mean,
right.
You probably have to because it's your job, but I think if we want to know what he said, we could read the transcripts, and we know how much viewer ratings and things like that matter to this man. So I think anything that we can do to not pay attention to him tonight would be helpful.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that and are saying that they just can't even morally, much less, stomach watching him tonight. One special caution, and Jim, thank you for your comments, spot on. One special caution, do not play the classic drinking game tonight. If you think that you're going to have a shot every time Donald Trump tells a lie, you may end up in the hospital. So please be careful tonight if you must watch the Trump campaign rally that's going to happen whatever the hour is. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Once again, public service announcement, no drinking games around Trump lying tonight. We have to keep our emergency rooms available for car accidents and things. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey, time for Geeky Science. I got a couple of really cool Geeky Science stories for you. There we go. There's our Geeky Science music. The first is, the climate change people, the anti-climate change people, the liars that are paid for by the Kochs and by other fossil fuel billionaires, have been saying for some time, well, the proof that the Earth, has these temperature variations, it's just all normal, is the driest, the little ice age, they refer to it as. It was in the 1600s. And the world got so cold that the rivers in London, the Thames, froze over, that crops failed, that the colony that was on Greenland could no longer live there because they got wiped out by snow. And nobody ever knew what caused this, right? Why was it that for about a 60, 70, 80-year period, we had this period of unusual cold? Well, they've looked at the ice bubbles in Antarctica and discovered that the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere actually went down during this century, essentially, the 1600s. So why did the CO2 go down? It turns out that apparently the CO2 levels went down because all across North and South America, fields that had previously been cultivated had fallen fallow. Farms, literally farms, millions of acres of agricultural stuff, people growing crops, were turned into forests and jungles. How did that happen? Genocide. White Europeans came to North America and killed an estimated 50 million Native Americans, many of them by guns and bullets, many of them by disease. But it was the worst genocide in the history of the world. And when those people died off, they were no longer tending to their farms, and their farmland went back to being forest and jungle, and forests and jungles sequester carbon. So it was sucking carbon out of the atmosphere for 100 years. It's amazing. And that's the story number one. Story number two is kind of cool. This is Avi Loeb is the chairman of the astronomy department at Harvard University. There is an object that came flying by our sun, flying by our planet, and is now way out where Jupiter is. It's called Oumuamua. And this professor says, this thing is going faster than anything could. Right? Originally, they thought it must have been ejected from a star that had broken or something like that because it's going so fast. But the weird part is, after it passed our sun, it speeded up. And it just, there's no object, no normal object that should be traveling that fast as it's going flying out of our solar system right now. He says what it is a light sail. It's like, something like it's a mile wide and only a millimeter thick, and it's being pushed by sunlight. And therefore, it has to have come from another civilization. He says it's probably a fragment of an old ship. It might be a ship itself that's working as on a light sail. And he just comes right out and says it. He says that this could be an extraterrestrial spacecraft or a piece of one. It's moving so fast past the sun, it could only have come from another star. And then he says it's moving too fast for an inner rock, Loeb points out. This is from a piece in the Washington Post about this by Avi Selleck, or Syke. Loeb points out, zooming away from the sun is if something is pushing it from behind it. If it's a comet, there's no signs of that. So an object that's very long, no more than 1 millimeter thick, perhaps like a kilometer long obloid pancake, a ship's sail so thin and light that sunlight is pushing it out of our solar system. So we got that. And then finally, the bulldozers arrived, or are soon to arrive, at the National Butterfly Center down in Texas. They are going to destroy America's National Butterfly Center, this huge butterfly wildlife habitat on the border, in order to build Donald Trump's wall. Aren't we excited? Sharice in Paulsbo, Washington. Hey, Sharice, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was thinking about what Stacey Abrams might want to challenge Trump on, and I thought somebody should say, what has he done to make America great again, since that's what he campaigned on? There's been no improvement in health care or infrastructure. But so as a side note to the infrastructure thing, I was just wondering if most Americans know how many military bases we have in foreign countries. The last I looked up, it was around 800.
Yeah, it's over 700.
In Germany, 113 in Japan. And if we brought some of those people home, wouldn't they be perfect at tackling our infrastructure with the Army Corps of Engineers? And instead of all our tax dollars paying our military personnel to prop up the economies of the countries they're staying in, which is $10,000 to $40,000 more than what we have to pay to house them here, they could be here spending their money at our grocery stores and at our whatever, and having being directed by the Army Corps of Engineers to start rebuilding our infrastructure. I mean, we're kind of be a swap, money for money.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sharice. And we could fund a new Marshall Plan. What was it? The program for returning GIs after World War II. Oh, the GI Bill. We could fund a new GI Bill with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be propping up Halliburton and all those other big corporations that are making money while we keep perpetuating these overseas bases. That's who's making the money.
Yep.
Our tax dollars pay for the military to be there, and then they pay the Halliburtons, the KBRs, and all those to build those things. Anyway, just thought maybe a Democrat.
I think it's a brilliant idea, Sharice. I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. Thank you for calling and making that point. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
The State of the Union is our national consciousness, which is in a state of emergency. It's as mercurial as the weather. Do you realize, Tom, that Chicago had a 71-degree swing in temperature in less than a week?
All right. And Chicago was colder than the North Pole.
And yesterday was up to 48 degrees.
Right.
Yet, can you imagine this, Tom? You and I both grew up in Michigan at the same time. When we were kids, almost every day, and certainly on the weekends, our families, or my family, we went ice skating on the frozen lakes, the little lakes that were, around the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Those lakes haven't frozen solid enough to skate on in 3 or 4 decades.
Wow.
I mean, really, since I was probably, the ice was getting lousy when I was probably in my 20s. And now, but they have temperatures that swing down into the negatives, but the lakes don't freeze it. No, but there's nowhere to skate anymore. In other words, you can't have, and now the temperatures I just looked at, they were up into the 50s yesterday in the Detroit area.
Yeah, I had friends who used to go ice fishing, and apparently that's all gone to hell, too.
When we were kids, a normal winter day was 20s to 30s, maybe possibly a high of 35, but it was consistent. We didn't have these wild swings. Can you imagine if it was a normal day when we were young, 20, 25 degrees, and a 71-degree swing made it in 91 degrees?
Yeah.
In a week? That would be crazy. But see, this is our national consciousness, but what we're being told is this is normal.
Yeah.
This is normal for this mercurialism is normal.
Yeah, and it's not, and it's fascinating to hear a couple of old farts here. Back when I was young, Paul, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and I think that all of us, old enough to remember how different not only American politics and everything else were 40, 50 years ago, but how different the weather was. Need to be teaching the younger generation about that. Paul, well said. Thank you. Jordy in Seattle. Hey, Jordy, what's up?
Hi, in Seattle, rather than watching the speech, a lot of people are going to be in the streets. Also in New York.
Oh, interesting. Are there organized protests? Who's putting this stuff together?
Fascist.org has it posted on their site. New York, it's 8 o'clock at Columbia Circle, Seattle at 5 o'clock at Broadway and Pike. They show L.A., San Francisco, Houston, Honolulu, and I think others if you get down far enough into their site.
What's the website again?
Refusefascism.org. They say we're 2 years into a fascist regime and we need to drive them out. We have to make the change getting into the streets in the name of humanity. The Trump-Pence regime must go.
Refusefascism.org. We will check it out. Jordy, thanks for the heads up on that. Terry in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. I'm very concerned about how we are destroying and putting the nature inside of us. I'm referring to how George Lakoff referenced or described our environment. I think that should be one of the key topics that should be discussed at our State of the Union tonight. But, of course, Trump, the tumultuous, tyrannical picture of the president, will never do so. So I'm very concerned every time I hear about Trump ignore the advice of the experts and how we need to protect our environment and therefore protect Homo sapiens species, human beings. I'm very concerned about this. And to that point, I think some noted experts said that we should not refer to it as global warming. Global warming is just one aspect of many more complex phenomenon because it sounds too benign. We should refer to it as what experts said as a global climate breakdown or global climate collapse.
Yeah.
And I think, and I know you've studied the human psyche, that these oligarchs, they seem to get the impression that their money, their massive wealth is going to somehow make them exempt from global climate breakdown. But I think once they realize that we are in this together, that no one is going to be exempt, regardless of your balance sheet or the amount of money you have in your bank account, that we at some point have got to start protecting the nature inside of it.
Yeah,
so
I'm with you.
That should be one of the most important points to be discussed at the State of the Union, but the attention of the president will not do that, of course.
Yep. Spot on, Terry. Thanks a lot. We'll be back with more of your calls and thoughts about what's going on here in just a moment. It is 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Rob in Waconia, Minnesota, watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind, Rob?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing today?
Great, but I'll get better. How about you?
Well, hanging in there. It's quite snowy today, so your listener or your caller who called before who was worried about up and down temperatures, you got to move out here to Waconia. We got plenty of ice.
Yeah.
But in any case, you read a list earlier about the Democratic candidates and their ranking, and I noticed that Tulsi Gabbard wasn't anywhere on the list, I believe.
Right. I think that she's. I don't think that she's a serious candidate. No, I'm sure that she thinks she's a serious candidate. I don't think that she has a chance. And typically members of the House of Representatives don't. In fact, I may be wrong, but I think that John Quincy Adams might be the only guy who ever moved from the House of Representatives to the White House. Dennis Kucinich was kind of a perennial candidate out of the House. He was not taken seriously by the majority of Americans. He was taken seriously by a lot of us, on the progressive left, but it wasn't enough to make anything happen. But he used that candidacy to highlight issues that were really important. And so, you don't. If somebody, if Tulsi Gabbard is doing it for that reason, to raise her own profile and to raise the profile of those issues, I think that's a fine reason to run for president. I just don't think that there's a chance that she's going to be, seriously considered. I might be wrong. I might end up, totally missing this, but it's, that's my take on it.
Did you see her announcement speech?
I did not.
Okay. I will send that to you on Twitter if I haven't already.
Cool.
The other thing I was wondering about is I'm seeing a lot of people posting on social media about the disparity between Trump's, his tax plan and how everybody was going to get, rich off of it,
right.
And how now more people are having to pay in because of the reduction in the withholding tax.
Yep.
And how people are being so surprised that, instead of getting this huge refund that they were expecting, Now they're having to pay in this year, and they're saying Trump has betrayed them, and they're surprised that this has happened.
Yeah. And they shouldn't be. I mean, we've all been telling people Trump is going to raise taxes on working people, which he did, and raise fees and, figure out all kinds of other ways, and plus by making state income taxes no longer deductible. It's just, these are huge differences. And yet they changed the withholding tables so that people were basically, withholding the same amounts last year. Hoping that it would take a year for people to figure out the scam, and that maybe if people figured it out in 2019, they wouldn't put two and two together and figure out that it had to do with a tax cut for billionaires in 2017. But I think you're absolutely right. People are figuring it out, and they're seriously pissed off. Rob, thanks for the call. Leslie in Oak Park, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Oh, thank you to all the people who called in and to your guest speakers. They're very informative. In fact, thank you for letting us know that Harris was going to speak, and that after Abrams, that Bernie was going to speak.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
However,
Leslie, let me put you on hold. I put you on. I didn't realize we were coming on this break. I missed my cue here. It's my fault. I'm going to bring you back in just a second. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. Okay, Leslie in Oak Park, Illinois. Leslie, you were about to make a point, and we hit the break.
Yeah,
what's up?
I don't want his ratings to go up, Trump's ratings to go up on the address tonight. However, I can't stress enough the importance of, no matter what speeches it is, to watch the whole of it and watch the original of it, because then you get to see how the various media outlets and big corporate media take things out of context, and which things they let us know about and which things they do not let us know about.
Yeah, you're right. It's sort of like in football. Sometimes the commentary is even more interesting than the play-by-play, than the game itself. And in this case, on the one hand, if you don't want to give Trump the numbers, don't watch it on television. Watch it online. Watch it on C-SPAN online or something like that. I don't know if Free Speech TV is going to be carrying it now. I didn't get an announcement from them, so I'm assuming that they're not. But yeah, excellent point.
Yeah. So then when you see the commentary, you know how biased they are.
Yeah, good point, Leslie. Thank you very much for the call. Sally in Powell, Wyoming. Hey, Sally, what's up?
Hi, I wanted to make a statement. Throughout history, civilizations and governments have fallen after about 200 or 250 years for the very same reasons we're facing today, and we are all doomed if we don't change. I feel that people should have compassion, consideration, kindness, and love for all of life, and maybe then the earth will have a chance.
Yeah,
and that's my statement.
That 2.5 century mark seems to be the point at which corruption just overwhelms governments. And I don't think anybody's ever figured out exactly why. There's that famous Alexander Tytler quote He is supposed to be a Scottish economist from the 1800s, but actually it's a phony made-up quote. But basically what he says is that, eventually you get to the point where the people vote themselves enough benefits and freebies that they bankrupt the government and everything goes down in flames. I don't think that there's actually any basis for that. I don't think that that's ever in history been what happened. I think that if we do look at history, though, whether it's the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, whether it's the Greek Republic or the Greek democracy, whether it's even countries like Poland or Hungary or Russia, what you see is that when countries start to slide, it's because the elites, it's because the oligarchs have stolen everything. And then when they get that top heavy, that bloated with basically stolen wealth, that's when democracies start to fail. So good point, Sally. Thank you very much for the call. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, thoughts on the State of the Union?
The State of Disunion, and I'm not watching it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Bernie Sanders give his speech after Stacey Abrams this evening. I just can't believe that. Well, at my college, when we'd have the opposing team, we would turn our backs and go, boo. I hope that that's what the House of Representatives does, and the senators, too.
Yeah. I hope that CNN or MSNBC carry Kamala Harris's prequel and Bernie Sanders's, after Stacey Abrams. He's going to wait until she's done before he delivers his. So yeah, I would love to see them carry all four of them, although I'm skeptical that that's what's going to happen. But are you going to be tracking those down tonight, Joe?
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if we can differentiate between the DLC side of the coin here and the true progressives with healthcare for all. I think that's what Bernie's going to stick to. And
I think people are figuring that out. I mean, look at the blowback that Sherrod Brown got when he said, first step is actually Medicare for people 55 and older. And the response from progressives was, what? Are you whipping out on us, Sherrod? Come on, don't do that.
We got to turn out the vote, and this healthcare for all is the way to winning ticket. I just can't, it's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
We're already paying, like you say, $400 billion in 10 years, so why not do it this way?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Joe. And if you look at the cost of health care right now, or the cost of health insurance, the cost of paying the bills, that's all insurance companies do. They're bankers, right? They pay the bills. And why the hell are we paying our bankers 20% off the top? Why are we letting them skim 20% off the top to pay our damn bills when Medicare can do it for 1%? I don't get it.
If we could get Tom Perez to say that, because I didn't.
Oh, we
hear that
did.
This morning.
Tom Perez was on this show about an hour ago, and he did say that, and he agreed with that. And I also pointed out to him that with the GI Bill, after the GI Bill was all over, we figured out that for every dollar we spent educating people like my father, we got $7 in additional tax revenue because they had higher incomes than they would have had without a college education. And so, tax-free college is actually an investment that produces a 700% return on investment. It's crazy not to do tax-free college, just like it's crazy not to do Medicare for all. We are being ripped off by health insurance companies. We're being ripped off by universities. We're being ripped off by banks that are selling us student loans. The entire thing is a scam, and you can't even declare bankruptcy on it because of the 2005 bankruptcy bill, which needs to be repealed. Joe, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. There's so much to do. Meanwhile, Stuart Varney over at Fox Business, he's all freaked out. Yesterday he was complaining that his Uber fare went up because New York City raised their minimum wage. Poor multimillionaire Stuart Varney. Oh, we're so sorry you had to pay more for your Uber car. It's tough. It's tough. Anyhow, we'll be dissecting the State of the Union tomorrow. And in the meantime, tonight, once again, be very careful. No drinking games that have to do with Trump lying. We have to keep our emergency rooms free for cars. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bye.